Welcome to the Market.Sell.Win podcast. Our guest today, Rob Davidson, is one impressive dude. With origins in the agency world of marketing, Rob decided to put his money where his mouth is, starting his own business over 20 years ago. Today, he has grown his operations to be a superpower in the state of Arizona. Two topics I am excited to cover are, one, how do you best scope out a project, starting with defining the real purpose? And two, how do you present your ideas and get approval? Both are things that people working on the agency side of the fence do really well. And I know we are going to learn a lot from Rob's experience and perspective. So with that, let me welcome our guest. Rob Davidson, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Julie.
I am so glad that you're spending some time with us today. So in this first segment, we wanted to kick things off and talk a little bit about your career journey, highlighting some of the skills that you found to be important and the impact that mentors have had in helping shape your career. So I will ask you to just share with us some of the steps and the path that you've gone down. Now, I will say that some of our other guests have gone all the way back to childhood, which you are more than welcome to do.
Right.
It's only a 15-minute segment, though. So, but no, I mean, they went back because it actually, in their case, was, influence from parents and others throughout their life. So anyway, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Sure. I like to say it's all by accident, but the reality is, to go back to the kid segment, my father always joked that I always knew all the jingles and I knew all of the ad slogans for all the ads on TV and radio, but I couldn't remember any of my spelling words. I couldn't memorize formulas for math, anything that was actually practical in his mind, for school.
Right.
So in some ways, I guess maybe I was drawn into it early, but, I kind of followed a very typical process. Coming out of college, there wasn't, this is the dark ages, right? The pre-2000s.
Right.
When it came out of school, it was a communication degree. There was no marketing, design, or anything, advertising degrees. None of that existed at the time, or at least they didn't at the state school I was at. So I did the typical, internships and worked through that process. Luckily, got some work freelance. That freelance work led to some agency work. This was out in Los Angeles, then went back to Chicago where I grew up and worked in a few agencies there. And then at one point worked in-house for a company doing kind of what we call client-side work. Then came out to Phoenix just because of just purely for a weather change.
Who blames you coming from Chicago?
Sure. Yeah, it was like one of those 6 months without the sun. And honestly, and the other part of that is just workload. So in Chicago, as a freelance designer or a designer in an agency, you're working 80 to 100 hours a week, every week, all the time. So they always have that joke, if you're not here Sunday, don't bother being here Monday, sort of thing. And so at some point I was like, look, I can work this hard. I just would rather prefer to do it somewhere where it's above 30 below zero. Mm-hmm. So ended up moving out to Phoenix, worked in another agency here, eventually met my partner, then to be my wife at some point later down the line. And she and I started a business in 2001. So that's how we end up here. As I say, it's all by accident, right? There was no grand scheme or large thought process that went into it. Some of it just kind of happened, I guess, holistically or naturally.
Which I think is very common. I mean, and part of it is just not putting the pressure on yourself to have this grand plan, but just, kind of take things as they come. If you like doing something, continue down that path and good things will happen. I know that sounds overly simplistic, but there is a little bit of truth to it.
Yeah, that's true. And then, it's funny because, one of the things I've learned throughout all the years is my strengths and weaknesses, obviously. There are individuals that can plan everything out in every detail and perceive that. And that is not one of my strengths. I'm much better at kind of rolling with things. So to your point, yeah, some people may overthink this, and that may be perfectly fine for them because I think that is a strength for certain A-type people. So I'm jealous, really,
Yeah, I know there are points, and I actually tend to lean towards that side, but when you try and make it too prescriptive, it just doesn't always pan out, and then you're disappointed. So you'd be better off going with the flow.
The best laid plans. Yeah,
exactly. So, all right. So now you, and you have been, I mean, I know you co-founded your business, but so, I think your day job is you're president of an advertising and marketing agency. So what does the day in the life look like for you?
Wow. Well, it's an interesting question, because the farther you go up the food chain in an agency, the farther you get away from the skill that got you there.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas my background was in creative and design and elements of that nature, today I spend my life in management or strategy and planning meetings or administrative work. Very, very different from the creative world. For instance, I have a lot of operational meetings, with teams and even our own internal sales, marketing, proposal responses, et cetera, which is, 180 degrees of where I thought I would be. But that's just the nature. That's what needs to be accomplished at this level. Now, I do know some friends that own other agencies that have managed to keep themselves in creative roles.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great. You can do that. You just can't do it with scale. So at some point, it limits how large you can grow if you are the chief creative officer, per se.
Ah, yeah, that's an interesting point. An interesting comment, too, just about the further up you go. And I would say, even if you're working for somebody else, if you're at a director level or a, senior manager, whatever the titling scheme is, you're right. The higher you go, you're involved more in those strategy conversations, but less in, perhaps what you were passionate about when you were younger. So,
yeah.
So here's one. Any regrets with kind of putting your own shingle out and growing your business?
Well, what's our time limit here? I think if I had to say, what would you do differently? I don't necessarily have a regret with starting the business. I will say it is not the easiest way to earn a dime.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that I was not the most likely individual to start a business. So I had a lot of obstacles to overcome, most of which were internal, meaning specifically knowledge. At the end of the day, a business is a business. It's ad agency, still a business, right? You got to have a core operating principle. So, you have to understand financial, and that took me a long time to understand financial.
Mm-hmm.
It just is not innate in my. Now, you can hire individuals to do it. Absolutely. Do you have a bookkeeper and a CFO or even an accountant? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, if you can't read a P&L or a balance sheet or something, then you're in trouble. So, because regardless of what other people are doing, you're ultimately where the buck stops. You're the one that has to understand every segment of the operations, the sales, the marketing, the finance of the business, at least well enough to understand where the issues are, what needs focus, et cetera. So I would say, that would probably be my biggest regret. My biggest regret was probably not giving myself the foundation to do it right. And even though we've been successful, I would say that's more of the school of hard knocks than, a smooth sailing ship or a thought out process. But there are definitely downsides. I would say, now I yearn for an 80-hour work week. You end up working way more hours than that. You end up working nights, weekends. You kind of never stop. You're always entertaining clients or prospects or, important stars within the team, et cetera. So it kind of really becomes all encompassing.
It's interesting, and I'm sure that other business owners would echo the same things you're saying. My husband has gone down that path too, and at points was like, wow, it was so much easier working for somebody else. But then there are also the benefits of, you are kind of creating your destiny, and there is something exciting about the creation part of it, but there's a lot of hard work that goes into it. So kudos to you and your partner, because 20 years In fact, I was looking up a statistic on that. And what was the stat? I think it said that only 25% of businesses make it past 15 years. So,
well, there you go.
Congratulations.
You have to, yeah. Either that or you have to be dumb enough to stay with it, right? So I'm not sure which way you want to look at that.
We'll go with the former.
There we go.
So, all right, if you think about like a couple of skills that you have found to be important, and in your world, you are wearing so many different, I hate the saying, but I'm going to say it, hats. Like, what are some of the skills that you have found to be the most important? And they might be soft skills versus technical skills.
Well, I think they all are soft skills. And so for me, it's the one really positive about both being a business owner and I would argue an ad agency at large. The one thing it brings is if you have an opportunity, you never stop learning, whether that's our clients' services and products and what they're bringing to market, and there's a challenge and you're always learning something new there, or more importantly, like I alluded to earlier, just even picking up skills that you need to operate in your business that you don't foundationally have. All of that is really kind of, in a nutshell, what I would just say, never stop learning. That's probably the most important thing you can do, period. Whether it's highly relevant or not, I don't think is as important. It's just that desire to never stop learning. Mm-hmm. The other two are kind of, like you said, very soft. One would be persistence. I would say being stubborn is probably a good thing in some elements. Never giving up. There are going to be days where everything seems extremely negative. There are going to be quarters or years where things are really, really bad and dire. And there are going to be quarters and years that everything's really, really great. You just kind of have to always have a drive to continue because there will always be roadblocks, obstacles. There'll always be problems. And that kind of brings me, I guess, to the last one that at least I focused on, which is trying not to be negative. I find it easier if you're an optimist, because there's an awful lot of, there's always negative to dwell within. Even the largest, biggest, most enviable companies in the world, if you get, you pull back the screens, it's kind of like Wizard of Oz. Right. Pull back the screens and it's like, oh, what's back here? And it's chaos, right? Or it's a mess, or their operational flow is a problem, or the billing department's a problem, or whatever it is. There's always something that needs a good deal of work. So finding the positive light in there, approaching things from a positive perspective, approaching change from, being positive about that, trying to keep your team looking forward to the positive elements. We're currently in this, and just really more for prosperity in case someone's listening to this years from now, we're currently in this COVID situation. And so it's very easy for people to focus on negative elements. I just try and keep my team, my employees, my clients focused on the positive elements out there. Here are the opportunities. Here's where you can make hay. Here's where we can push things forward. Here's how we can better ourselves as a company, as a service provider, as a consultant, et cetera. So I guess between those three, it's probably the most important elements, I think, and they're all soft skills. Yeah, and they're all great. I mean, I think, whether you own your own business or not, the learning piece, I won't regurge. They're all fantastic. And I think, in marketing too, it's like that persistence and never giving up and trying not to be negative. I feel like, we're kind of putting ourselves out there with ideas, and sometimes we have to help people see the magic of the idea that we're presenting. So it's like you need that persistence. And you have to try not to get too down if somebody isn't, meeting you where you thought they would. So, sure. So great insights. Thank you. All right. So let me switch over to mentors. Have they played a role in your career? Not directly. I've had, I guess, indirect mentors, like individuals. I think for me, really what I have done personally is more modeled my individual behavior after other people and their mannerisms. So I guess I could say one of my strengths is knowing my own weaknesses, right? I'm very aware of where I fall short on the spectrum on lots of things, right? And depending how long you want to, spend on this, you can bring my wife in and we can go through a 3-hour consultation on this. But
that's not the service I offer. But anyway, go on.
Right. That's a whole different, yeah. But I will say, and that being said, there are lots of people out there, even within your own company or within other sectors that you can look at and find things to help you kind of, I just think of it bettering myself, making a better product for my clients, for our company, for everything, right? So things, and I'm just thinking of things I personally had to work on. Like I personally had to work on the ability to see the big picture. Coming from a creative standpoint, I really wanted to look at the outputs and what, we had from a perspective and what was standing out there instead of saying, well, what is the larger marketing problem and what are the other issues here, right? And how does this all fit into the scheme of things? But I've learned, a lot of things from just even doing my homework, how to be prepped for a call or a prospect or a request for proposal, how to make sure we know what we're talking about, staying on top of new technology and evolving elements, all the way down to really small little things like making sure you're on time, and ahead of time. I had a really good friend that was in the military, and the one thing I learned from him is if you're not early, you're late. And it sounds so dumb, but it's like all these little things add up. So I would say I think you can, by all means, there are mentors, and I think mentorship is great for a lot of people. For me, because I was not following a linear path, because I was coming into a field that was kind of directly different, it would be one thing, I guess, if I was evolving through the marketing ranks at, I don't know, a large firm or something, and you say, okay, here's the next step ladder, or here's 2 up, and I'll build, what does it take to get to this director level or a C-suite? And developing that I think is a whole different ladder and chain than doing what I did, which was ultimately just start your own business and kind of start from ground zero. So, for me, it was about skill sets, not necessarily relationships or ways of managing, different thought leaders or leaders within the company, et cetera.
Yeah, but no, the way you phrase it with just learning from, lots of different people, it opens the world, because then you kind of keep your eyes open and you're like, hey, I really like that, saying about time. That's a good point. Or, wow, the way they presented that, or whatever it might be. But there's so much that we can learn from the people that we interact with regularly or even just in passing. So really cool perspective. Thank you. All right. So let me wrap it with, after a rough day, and it sounds like perhaps you've had one or two of those. Who hasn't? What is the one song that helps you shake it off?
Wow. Well, yeah, I have to be careful here because I have a lot of guilty pleasures that I'm not going to share because I'll probably never hear the end of it. But but I'm a big fan of I grew up in the 80s. There was an alternative movement there. There's a band called the Weaker Thans, which is probably not well known, but they have this song called A Cat Named Virtue that I really like. And really what I like about it is it's the story of this cat who's known for being lazy and narcissistic and worthless, basically complaining about their owner being worthless and to get your butt off the game. And for me, it's just always a good reminder that no matter how bad things are, you just need to get up, put your pants on tomorrow and, check into work and start over as a new day. So it's a fun song, and it's probably not well known by anyone, to be honest, but definitely worth sharing. So I'll give them a plug. They can now sell 5 records, maybe.
Yeah. And they appreciate that. Well,
I'm sure.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much. I just love hearing, people's stories, because there's just little nuggets that you can take away from each of these conversations. So thank you for sharing with us and your experience and your story. So thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.